Welcome to Inside American Politics by Skoob. I'm your host, Bradley Teller, and today we're peeling back the layers of a chapter in American history that's been buried beneath decades of myth, miseducation, and willful forgetting. A chapter that tried to redefine what freedom truly meant in this country. This isn't just a story about post-Civil War policies. It's about power, race, and a bold attempt to build a new American democracy from the ashes of slavery. This is the Reconstruction Era, a time when newly freed Black Americans seized political power, when the Constitution itself was rewritten to promise equality, and when those promises were violently, systematically stripped away. The textbooks often reduce it to a brief experiment, but the truth? It was a revolution, a second founding. And its collapse wasn't inevitable, it was orchestrated. But what if the real tragedy of Reconstruction isn't just that it failed, but how close it came to succeeding? What you're about to hear is more than a history lesson. It's a reckoning, a look at the deals made behind closed doors, the federal government's retreat from justice, and the white supremacist backlash that rewrote the narrative for generations. From the rise of black legislators in the South to the terror campaigns of the Ku Klux Klan, from radical Republicans to redemption, this is the battle for America's soul, fought not just with rifles and ballots, but with memory. This is the untold truth about Reconstruction. And if even part of it challenges what you were taught, then it's time we start asking why. Stay with us, because when it comes to American democracy, some of the most important fights are the ones still unfinished. Picture this. It's 1864. And Abraham Lincoln needs to win re-election in the middle of a devastating civil war. His political strategists have a brilliant idea. Let's balance the ticket with a Southern Democrat who stayed loyal to the Union. Enter Andrew Johnson from Tennessee, a man whose selection would prove to be one of the most consequential political miscalculations in American history. The logic seemed sound. Johnson represented the tradesmen and small farmers of Tennessee. He'd opposed the planter elite and the secessionists. Surely this would appeal to a broader constituency and show national unity, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. When John Wilkes Booth's bullet ended Lincoln's life just 1 month into his second term, Johnson found himself thrust into the presidency with virtually no preparation. And here's where things get really interesting and really tragic. Lincoln had the prestige of being the great emancipator, the man who'd guided the nation through its darkest hour. He might have been able to steer Reconstruction with a moderate approach that could have actually worked. Johnson? Not so much. Johnson's life story reads like a classic American tale, rising from poverty to become a voice for the common man. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. His views on race were absolutely toxic. He believed in white racial superiority, and saw African Americans as having inferior capacities for self-governance. In 1865, he declared, "White men alone must manage the South." But it gets worse. By 1867, in what historian Eric Foner calls possibly the most overtly racist statement ever made in an official presidential document, Johnson wrote to Congress that black individuals were incapable of self-governance and showed a constant tendency to relapse into barbarism. This is your President of the United States, folks, writing this in an official document. In 1867, Johnson faced off against the radical Republicans, figures like Charles Sumner, Thaddeus Stevens, and Ben Wade, who had very different plans for the South. And here's the kicker. Johnson couldn't match their determination or political savvy. During the 1866 congressional elections, he engaged in bitter public disputes, responding to hecklers in a manner completely unbecoming of a sitting president. It was political suicide. The result? An overwhelmingly radical Congress committed to making the South acknowledge its responsibilities for the Civil War and protecting the rights of newly freed slaves. Now, here's one of history's great ironies. When Johnson first became president, the radical Republicans were actually excited about him. Benjamin F. Wade, a prominent radical Republican senator, declared that with Johnson's leadership, governance would proceed without issues. Charles Sumner, the leading abolitionist, saw Johnson as a genuine ally for African Americans. Johnson even said the right things initially. Treason is a crime, and crime must be punished. The radicals thought they had their man. But then came the moment that should have been Johnson's vice presidential inauguration in 1865. Picture this scene. One of the highest offices in the land, a solemn occasion, and Johnson shows up, drunk, completely intoxicated. Journalist Noah Brooks described the surreal scene of Johnson delivering incoherent, drawn-out remarks, repeatedly adding unnecessary phrases like, "I can say that with perfect propriety." He even tried to continue speaking after taking the oath of office. It was a complete embarrassment. While some defenders suggested illness might have influenced his conduct, the overwhelming impression was of a man under the influence of alcohol. This should have been a warning sign of the instability to come. Johnson's true colors emerged quickly. Under Lincoln, the presidency had been an agent for change. Under Johnson, it became a barrier against progress. In his first year as president, Johnson took significant steps to revert Southern states back to their pre-Civil War status. He vetoed the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and the Freedmen's Bureau Bill, arguing that civil rights legislation unfairly favored African Americans over whites. The radical Republicans had seen enough. By 1867, they enacted the Reconstruction Acts, dividing former Confederate states into 5 military districts overseen by major generals, tasked with forming Republican-led governments supported by newly enfranchised African Americans. Johnson's vetoes? Overridden by substantial radical majorities. The final straw came when Johnson's moderate governments tried to reintegrate former Confederate leaders into Congress and enacted black codes that restricted African American rights to near-slavery conditions. The radicals moved to impeach Johnson, and he narrowly escaped conviction by just 1 vote. But here's where our story takes an extraordinary turn. While Johnson was busy being a disaster, something revolutionary was happening to the Constitution itself. The Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th, represent one of the most radical transformations in American history. Think about this. These amendments didn't just tinker around the edges. They fundamentally reimagined what America could be. The 13th Amendment formally ended slavery. The 14th introduced birthright citizenship, ensured equal protection under the law, and curtailed the political influence of insurrectionists. The 15th made it illegal to deny voting rights based on race. Historian Eric Foner puts it perfectly. These amendments reshaped the Constitution from a document originally focused on federal-state relations and property rights into a powerful tool through which vulnerable minorities could claim freedom and seek protection against government misconduct. This was America's second founding, folks. For the first time in the nation's history, we were attempting to create a genuine multiracial democracy with equal standing for black people and other marginalized groups. It was a comprehensive rejection of the government-endorsed political, economic, and social inferiority of black Americans that had persisted since the country's founding. The transformative vision was revolutionary. And here's what's particularly fascinating. Modern originalists, those folks who love talking about the Founding Fathers and the Framers' Constitution, they're notably quiet about these Reconstruction Amendments. They'd rather focus on 1787 than 1867. Wonder why? Despite all the political chaos, something remarkable was happening on the ground. The Reconstruction Era saw the establishment of public education systems in the South, offering blacks and poor whites their first real chance at literacy. The Freedmen's Bureau provided essential resources: food, clothing, fuel, and assistance to impoverished freed slaves. And the political changes? Absolutely stunning. In 1867, at the start of Reconstruction, no African Americans held political office in the South. 0. Within just 3 years, black individuals constituted at least 15% of all elected officials in Southern states. Get this. 15 years after the Voting Rights Act of 1965, considered the pinnacle of the civil rights movement, less than 8% of elected officials in the South were African American. Reconstruction achieved better representation in 3 years than the modern civil rights movement achieved in 15. African Americans weren't just voting. They were taking control of local governments, opening schools, launching businesses, and filling legislative positions. Literacy rates soared. With federal troops providing protection, this brief moment showed what American democracy could actually look like. But, and this is crucial, Much of this progress was more symbolic than substantial. The 15th Amendment didn't prohibit states from instituting educational or residential voting requirements, leaving room for poll taxes and literacy tests. Many laws were declarations of intent rather than enforceable federal mandates. Without an organized entity like the NAACP to share the burden of legal challenges and facing constant threats of violence, few African Americans could pursue their rights in court. Still, for a brief shining moment, America glimpsed what it could become. And then came the backlash. Oh boy, did it come. Here's a statistic that should shock you. Despite the Union's victory in the Civil War, only one Confederate official, Henry Wirz, the commandant of Andersonville Prison, faced execution. Meanwhile, hundreds of Unionists, both white and black, were murdered by Confederate sympathizers. The violence was systematic and brutal. In Hinds County, Mississippi, during the period from 1865 to 1867, when former Confederates controlled the state government, there was an average of one African American killed per day. Per day, folks. In 1868, Louisiana, white Democrats murdered 1,081 people, most of them African Americans or white Republicans. In North Carolina, a Republican judge documented 700 beatings and 12 murders in just one judicial district. The Memphis riot of 1866 gives you a taste of this violence. Armed white mobs attacked a black neighborhood, killed 40 African Americans, and set every black church in the city on fire, every single one. But the violence wasn't random, it was strategic. White supremacists specifically targeted education. General O.O. Howard, head of the Freedmen's Bureau, reported widespread efforts to deny freed slave spaces for schooling. Mobs burned school buildings and churches serving as educational sites across the South. Teachers faced flogging, threats, expulsion, and murder. This wasn't about black ignorance, as some would later claim. This was about white violence designed to maintain racial hierarchy through terror. The resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan turbocharged this campaign of terror. Using lynchings, bombings, and mob violence, they systematically dismantled Reconstruction achievements. Their terrorism was effective. It led to the removal of federal troops from the South and the abandonment of civil rights enforcement. Once federal oversight disappeared, Southern states got creative with oppression. They revived vagrancy laws and harshly enforced regulations against activities like mischief and insulting gestures, offenses that somehow always seemed to apply disproportionately to black folks. This led to the Convict leasing system, which Douglas Blackman brilliantly documented in Slavery by Another Name. Countless African Americans were arrested on dubious grounds, faced impossible court costs and fines, and were then leased as laborers to private enterprises. Here's the truly horrific part. Mortality rates in these convict leasing operations were higher than under slavery. Why? Because unlike slave owners who had a financial investment in keeping their slaves alive, these private contractors had no long-term interest in their workers' survival. They worked people to death in lumber camps, brickyards, railroads, and plantations throughout the South. The Freedmen's Bureau faced severe funding cuts and became virtually inoperative. The brief moment of possibility was over. The end of Reconstruction wasn't inevitable. It was a choice. A choice by the federal government to withdraw from addressing racial violence. A choice to abandon the revolutionary promise of the Reconstruction Amendments. The core issue was never black ignorance or incapacity, as later propaganda would claim. It was the challenge of integrating former Confederates into a new social and political order, when those former Confederates were committed to maintaining white supremacy through violence and terror. Many textbooks still get this wrong. They blame the collapse on African Americans' alleged inadequacies or Northern fatigue with Southern problems. But that misses the point entirely. The transformative task wasn't impossible because of black limitations. It was sabotaged by white resistance and violence. What we're really looking at is a massive failure of political will. The United States had just fought the bloodiest war in its history, passed revolutionary constitutional amendments, and created the framework for a genuine multiracial democracy. But when the going got tough, when the violence escalated, when the commitment required sustained effort and courage, America blinked. So what does all this mean for us today? The Reconstruction era offers both inspiration and warning. It shows us that dramatic social change is possible, that America can, in moments of crisis and possibility, reach for its highest ideals. The Reconstruction amendments remain powerful tools for justice. The brief period of Black political participation proved that democracy works when everyone gets to participate. But Reconstruction also shows us how quickly progress can be reversed when we lack the political will to defend it. It demonstrates how violence and terrorism can undermine democratic institutions. It reveals how historical narratives can be manipulated to justify present injustices. The failure of Reconstruction wasn't just a 19th century tragedy. It shaped the America we live in today. The Jim Crow system that emerged from Reconstruction's collapse lasted for nearly a century. The wealth gaps, educational disparities, and political inequalities we see today have deep roots in that failure. But here's the thing that gives me hope. The Reconstruction amendments are still there. That vision of a multiracial democracy with genuine equality is still embedded in our Constitution. The work of Reconstruction isn't finished. It's ongoing. That's our journey through Reconstruction, America's second founding, and one of the boldest, most turbulent efforts to redefine what freedom and citizenship truly mean. But this isn't just a story about post-war amendments and failed policies. It's about the lengths a nation will go to either fulfill its ideals or abandon them. It's about progress built in plain sight and the powerful forces that rose up to bury it. Yes, we have the Reconstruction amendments enshrined in the Constitution, but what about the promises that were never kept? The governments that were overthrown, the voices erased from the history books, and the question we still haven't fully answered: what would America look like today if Reconstruction had been allowed to finish? And maybe the bigger question is this: why did they stop it? And who benefited when they did? Because when progress threatens the status quo, resistance gets organized. When power shifts, pushback follows. And when democracy expands, it doesn't just test our institutions, it tests our resolve. Reconstruction was real. Its vision, revolutionary, its undoing, a warning, and its legacy, still unfolding. To explore more of the events, voices, and political maneuvers we couldn't fully unpack today, along with original documents, expert interviews, and extended commentary, head over to the Skoob app for the full episode. Whether you're a student of history or just a curious citizen, you'll find that the unfinished work of Reconstruction is closer to our present than we'd like to admit. Download Skoob now on the App Store or Play Store. I'm your host, Bradley Teller. Thanks for walking through history with me. And remember, the fight for democracy didn't end in 1877. It just changed forms. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay committed.